Good
Hello,
evening, good
hello.
evening, good evening. How you doing, my brother?
I'm good, man. How you doing, Dr. Edward Woods III? My
Well,
brother from
Pastor,
another mother. What's
hey,
happening, man?
Pastor, it's been a minute, but it's good to see you. We're happy to be back. I'm talking about Juneteenth, what to know and how to celebrate. Want to
Yes.
get it in early because Juneteenth is under attack. With
Oh,
these
man.
cuts and
Yes, it is.
programs, and 5 years after George Floyd in Minneapolis, what is really
Mhm.
happening. So just want people to know what to know and how to celebrate. It could be a community event, it could be a faith event. What can we do to celebrate in our respective communities with regards to this
Yes.
holiday?
Yes, man. That's right, man. And we want to encourage everybody that's coming on. I know it's 7:02 here in the Central Time, 8:02 on the East Coast. We want you to like, we want you to subscribe, and we want you to share this broadcast. We know it's going to be educational. Of course, it's going to be good because we don't mind speaking truth to power over here at CJC. But go ahead and share it. I know the Sabbath is coming in some places. We're not competing with any Knicks games. I just have to put that in there before the Sabbath. But no, man, we want everybody to come on in. And this is going to be a great discussion that we're going to have tonight.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we have a great panel. And we want to start off with the ladies. It's not often that you can get a creator, an artistic director, but live from Huntsville, Alabama, is nobody else but my sister, Danita Lachelle, is in the house. And look at that smile. It's bright, it's radiant, it's energetic, but don't let the smile fool you. She will cut you. She's the real deal. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Danita Lachelle here with productions by Danita Jones.
Hi, everybody. Wonderful to be here. I'm very excited.
Good to have you. Good to have you.
And then we got the Black Forward Shop. If you need some Juneteenth gear, there's no better place to go than the blackforwardshop.com, which is led by the entrepreneur, graphic artist extraordinaire, all the way from Philadelphia, PA, no other than Erica Keith, the creator and founder of Black Forward. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you all for having me today.
Amen.
And then we got to have a doctor in the house. And we didn't want him to fall asleep, so we made sure we had it early enough in the Pacific Coast so he could drop these bombs of wisdom, as he always does, as a philosopher, as a lawyer. And guess what? He's even an actor in his own right. Let's welcome none other than Dr. Timothy J. Golden is in the house, and we're happy to have you one more time again.
I am happy to be here, Woody and Pastor Josiah and Danita and my heart, man, my good friend Erica, my fellow Philadelphian. I long for some Philly, so it's good to see you on here, Erica.
Good to see you, Tim.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank
you all for having me.
Pastor Jay, kick us off.
All right. Well, let's say a word of prayer for those who are coming on. And we'll jump in. Father God, thank you for this moment. Thank you for this place. Thank you for this space. Lord, I pray that you will be with our discussion tonight. May your name be edified. May you be glorified. Lord, I pray that our people will receive a blessing that they stand in need of as we get ready to celebrate Juneteenth and all that it means to us in our communities and our churches. Have your way. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And amen. I was telling everybody, for those who are coming online, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, of course, we want you to share and subscribe and like what's going on. And when I first got here from the Caribbean, went to Andrews, so I didn't go to Oakwood. Don't hate. And after leaving Andrews, came to my first district out here in St. Joe, Missouri, and Atchison, Kansas, in the year 2000. And I showed up to church one Sabbath, and members asked me, are you celebrating Juneteenth? And I was like, what is that? Like, I never heard of it. No shade to Andrews. Well, I guess maybe a little bit of shade to Andrews. But I never heard of Juneteenth. Didn't know what it was. They're like, are we going to close church early? And I'm like, what is Juneteenth? And so I'm going to ask Dr. Tim Golden, who is the kind of resident historian attorney, scholar, constitutional, whatever in the house to kind of help us, explain to us what is Juneteenth all about. What is it before we, can celebrate it, before we can tell people how they engage. We want to know what it is. So tell us a little bit about Juneteenth, Dr. Gold.
All right, Pastor, thank you so much. Well, it's important to note that the slaves were in America were theoretically freed when President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January the 1st, 1863. A lot of slave states were slow to move on this proclamation, not because they had a bad internet connection, but, and they didn't find it took them. News did not travel as quickly then as it does now. So Texas was a state that continued with the practice of slavery until there were some military generals some Union generals who arrived in Texas and told the slaves that they had been freed 2.5 years prior to that. And the date that happened was June 19th, 1865. Now that happens in Texas. Now I'll share this story with y'all. Like Pastor Josiah, I had no idea. I'm born and raised in Philly, went to an HBCU, president of the Black Student Union when I was in college. And I graduate and I go down to Houston, Texas for law school. And I was there over the summer and everything had shut down on June 19th. And everybody was like, yeah, this is Juneteenth. I was like, what is, in the words of Pastor Josiah, what is Juneteenth? It began as a cultural celebration that was really restricted to Black people in Texas, right? It was a celebration that the Black community in Texas engaged in to remember the final emancipation of slaves in that state. So it started as a little known holiday until I think about 4 years ago when President Biden at the time in 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, we were trying to figure out what was going to happen with George Floyd, what was going to happen with police reform, what was going to happen with voting rights. By the way, 5 years after the death of George Floyd, we're still trying to figure out what's going to happen with police reform and what's going to happen with voting rights. But President Biden, along with Congress, signed a bill into law that made Juneteenth a national holiday. And so I kind of got in trouble, I haven't been on Facebook or social media in a long time for my mental health. But at that time, I was kind of cynical about it. And so I want to close with this, and I hate to be cynical about the day, but in 1986, President Reagan made Dr. King's birthday a national holiday, while Black people, men and women, were being arrested and warehoused under his criminal justice policies under what has today become known as mass incarceration. And at the time when President Biden acknowledges Juneteenth as a federal holiday, and it's now a federal holiday, Black people still don't have the right to vote protected, and Black people still don't have any meaningful police reform to constrain police from doing the kinds of things to the rest of us that happened to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tatiana Jefferson, Rekia Boyd. I mean, we could call the roll, right? So one irony is it's recognized as a holiday, but I wonder how much substance is behind it. And the other irony is that we're celebrating a day when slaves that had been freed 2.5 years before that day just found out that they were free So that, and again, I don't mean to be cynical
Sure,
about the
sure.
day. I think it's an important day in American history. I think the Black community should celebrate it. I think other communities should also celebrate it. But here's the problem: in order for other communities to celebrate it, other communities have to have an interest in Black history, which they
Point.
typically don't.
It's a
If
good point.
you receive the Advent message in a church in Indonesia and you get baptized, I guarantee you nobody is telling you about America's role in Bible prophecy, and nobody is telling you about the beast of Revelation 13 and slavery or anything else like that.
Mm,
Then you immigrate to the United States
mm,
and you go, you're around other Adventists and, you end up saying, what's Juneteenth?
mhm.
I actually had a brother from Africa ask me why we celebrate Dr. King's birthday. And so we have to ask ourselves deep critical questions along the lines of what kind of Adventism are we exporting to the world through our evangelism? I
Mm,
would love for other communities to share in the joy of Juneteenth with us. But in
mhm.
order to do that, they have to know what it is. And if you don't know anything about the Adventist church and slavery, and then you're just not going to know.
Mm,
So I think it's a day worthy of celebration. I
mhm.
also think it's a day in which we need to uh, practice education, right? We need to tell people from other communities about our history so that
Yeah.
they can appreciate it.
Mm,
So, that's the way that I understand the day. And I would just hope that at some point the public policy would match the significance of the symbol of the holiday.
mhm.
Let's get voting rights, let's get police reform, and then Juneteenth will mean even that much more.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Anybody else wants to follow up on what Dr. Golden started with? Any of the ladies? Dr. McCoy is on. Welcome, sir. Good. Welcome to our program. Uh, who wants to go next? I see Danita's smiling. So Danita, I'm gonna pick on you.
It's funny to me when we have discussions about situations like this, when we talk about the history of um, racism, oppression in this country, and how we as Black Americans have to deal with it on a daily basis. And what happens, I think, is that when we have a situation like a Juneteenth celebration, where, like what Tim was saying earlier, how are we celebrating this holiday when there is so much that is still going on, in our country? When really the reality of it sometimes is that we have such a palette, a colorful palette of history in this country as Black people. And oftentimes it is very difficult for us to see things separately because they still affect us together. So you have a situation like when we're talking about Juneteenth, we need to talk about Opal, the amazing woman that walked from Texas to DC to get this to be a federal holiday.
Mm,
She was not walking for police reform. She was not walking for voting rights. She chose this very specific thing for this holiday to be recognized as a federal holiday. And once she started that campaign, she did everything in her power in order to make that campaign happen. So, let's talk about some controversial things. When you have that kind of dedication, when you have that kind of concentrated effort in order to have something done, we see changes, right? I remember when people had a visceral response to getting Juneteenth in the midst of the George Floyd commotion. I remember that in the midst of, us getting subtle things like them taking Aunt Jemima off of the shelves and Uncle Ben off of the rice. But ultimately, we're screaming, what about, what about, what about? And what we have to understand sometimes is that it is often necessary for us to treat things in separate categories, even though they affect the same thing. So we know, for instance, when we have a concentrated effort, like in regards to Target right now, right? Target is losing billions of dollars because we took a concentrated effort to stop going to the store and stop shopping there, right? There are some of us, like myself, it is a withdrawal like no other that I have felt before, because that's my favorite store, but I was committed to doing that. So Target now is feeling this pressure solely because we decided that since you are going to not recognize that you need Black people or the Black dollars, we then are going to protest against you so you can feel what it looks like when our Black dollars are not being used. Nobody looks at this and says, what about police reform? What about voting rights? Nobody looks at the Target boycott and says, how come you guys don't? It is looked at as a successful, current boycott. But when we have moments like this, or even when Reagan, did what he did, there were concentrated efforts that people were putting into place to make these federal holidays. And it just so happened that it was happening while we were in a political unrest with other things. I don't think that negates what we're dealing with in the United States. I don't think that takes any pressure off of what we need to put concentrated effort towards. I don't think that it is done. I don't think it is done in a malicious way, like, hey, let's give the Black people this so they'll stop complaining. I don't think that's the case either in certain instances of this. But I think that it is important for us to recognize that when we have people like Opal that walked to DC and made this concentrated effort to have this holiday, we almost need to not look at it in a way as just like, oh, they gave us a holiday, but they haven't given us this. As much as we need to champion the fact that this woman and these people made the concentrated effort and they succeeded. And now it is our job to not only celebrate this holiday, but then find another concentrated effort in order to make other changes in the United States. Because we have learned, even from the civil rights movement, that when that concentrated effort is actually sustained, that we don't lose interest, that our attention span is not shortened, we actually get the results that we need.
That's good. That's good.
Wow. You said so much there, Danita. I agree with you and Tim both. A concentrated effort, I think, is really something that we should remember, that it's very important for us to lean into that. And that's how things, get done. I want to talk a little bit about making sure we don't lose our history. And I know there are a lot of things going on in the government right now, things going on in DC, our African American Museum, and places like that. Those places are under attack. There's a lot of books that have been banned. There are curriculums trying to be eliminated. There's so many things happening, trying to erase what we know to be true. And I am just the other day, maybe yesterday or today, I heard there was a TikTok going around, a few different TikToks about the validity of Harriet Tubman. Like, was she real? And I'm like,
what?
There are so many things going on right now that I'm like, I cannot believe people are actually forming their lips and their mouth to say these things. And these are Black people. Some of these people are Black people talking about, I don't believe Harriet Tubman is real. So what I want to say is, along with making sure that, we come together, for efforts like Juneteenth and MLK Day, we want to make sure, again, that we don't lose what we have, what we know to be true. Yeah. And how do we do that? We do that by celebrating a Juneteenth holiday. And what does that really mean, in our communities? Yes, we know that there were, folks in Galveston, Texas that, didn't know for 2 years and 6 months that they were free. That's really what it is. And those in Texas started celebrating that day because it was everything to them, right? And then we have adopted that. And I remember in 2020, during the unrest that we were all feeling, we were all at home, during the pandemic. We all watched with our eyes, George Floyd brutally murdered right in front of us. And I remember my son was maybe 7 at the time, 7 or 8. I think it was 8. My son Kingston. And these things just kept playing on the television, these reels of, Derek Chauvin's knee, in the neck of, we just saw just this violence right in front of us. And I remember my son Kingston asking us one day, why would a police officer do that? Like, why? I don't understand why that is even happening. And, we started, my husband and I kind of looked at each other like, how do we even start? And I remember Kingston's eyes just welling up. And then him being just overcome with emotion that he took off running outside in the backyard crying because this happened. And he was just could not understand how this could happen. And, I remember at that point in time, I was like, how do I explain, to Kingston what this is, what's going on? And so we try to do our very best. We told him that, not every police officer is bad, not every, person that's in authority, is evil, but it was just one incident, but there's a lot of history. We try to just make it, for his 8-year-old mind understand. And he just could not understand. He said, and I started trying to remember why he was think about why he was so hurt. It's because he wanted to be a police officer. He told us that earlier that year that he wanted to be a police officer. So, in my mind, I'm like, I have to do something as a parent. What can I do to make sure that, our kids understand that they are worthy, that they matter, that, they are important. And so that's where, and we can talk about it, here in a little bit, but that's where Black Forward was born. It was out of just making sure that, there are brands out there really purposely trying to find a way to make sure that we elevate, we uplift, and we empower our community. And so that's, I remember that summer coming up with some t-shirt designs just so that, my son, and I wish I had a picture, maybe during this time we're here, I can show you a picture of him wearing a Juneteenth shirt right after that, incident happened. Just seeing, him crying one moment and then holding his fist up like, yes, Juneteenth, this is a celebration that I want to make sure my son Kingston, remembers why he is important. So I know I said a whole lot, but I just wanted to just talk a little bit about why it's important to make sure that we don't lose, our history. And that's why it's really important to have these celebrations.
Never forget. I don't know the quote. I know Dr. McCoy probably knows it better than I do. But we have nothing to fear for the future unless we forgot how God has led us in the past. And that's paraphrasing. But no, we can't forget. And Dr. McCoy, I don't know if you want to jump in with us, man, and kind of share why it's important for us to celebrate holidays such as Juneteenth. For some of us who came over later and had no idea, like I said earlier, man, I thought folk were trying to get out of coming to church. I'm like, what is that? Like we don't have. And then as I learned, we started doing things on Sabbath, doing Juneteenth celebrations in churches that I've pastored and just trying to make a difference. But go ahead and give us a little history. Give us your take on it, Elder.
And good evening to everybody. I am somewhat reminded of where my place is. I'm looking at all these luminaries on the telecast, and I want to be very careful about some of the things that I say. I want to have a dictionary, thesaurus, or something here to make sure my grammar is correct.
Oh, man. No, sir. No, sir. Let's go ahead. Let's go ahead.
But, you know, I think it's great for us to celebrate a day. But what I think has happened to us is we have allowed our desire to have other people respect us appropriate unto ourselves the celebrations, the annual celebrations, and then we forget about it. Okay, you've got Juneteenth, and we're gonna go Opal Lee and Sheila Jackson Lee and all those who worked to get this holiday, and I'm really happy for it. But then for us, the next day, to go on with life as though nothing happened. Those holidays are there for other people to know who we are. We should always know who we are. And that we ought to have a 365-day celebration of who we are, especially in the United States of America. Now, you did you tell me? I think we were in Barbados and you were jumping around like you had been home.
Yeah, I was. I was.
And I wanted to say, calm down, son. You got to go back to the U.S., you know?
Right.
But Black people in America, we have had to carve out a place of respect for ourselves in the most powerful nation on earth. We are in an absolute minority in this country. Black people of the diaspora, especially if you're down in the Caribbean, those are Black nations. You know, they're in the majority. I remember the first time I went to Kenya and I walked out of that hotel in Nairobi and I saw all the Black people. Man, I did not know what to do with myself, you know? And I walked a couple of blocks and I saw a white female. And the first thing was, what is she doing here? You know? But my point is, we have to understand that these special days are for other people, unless we have failed to educate ourselves.
Right.
Now, one of the dangers. Now, shut me off if I'm talking too much. Let me know, and I'll shut up. But everybody I meet, and we begin to talk about the race issue, I want them to know that I'm not just Black. I'm blackety black. Okay.
There's a T-shirt for that, Elder.
Hey, Erica got you covered.
Erica got a T-shirt for you for that.
No, what I am, that T-shirt is in my head. You know, I grew up in the 7th Ward, New Orleans, Louisiana, which it's known as the most Creole of the wards in that city. Of my playmates, I was the only one that did not have straight hair. The girls, whenever we went around, they wanted to say, who's the Black one? I started looking around and said, who is he?
Mercy.
You know? So this is where I am from. And my parents drummed into our heads. Nobody's better. Nobody's smarter. Nobody's nicer looking
Mm.
than you are.
Mm, mm.
My father built a playhouse for us in our yard with a sliding glass window in it.
Mm.
It's the 1940s, not
Mercy.
40s, the 40s,
Mm,
you know, to drum into our heads pride. And my father was from Kosciuszko, Mississippi.
Mm.
Okay, so let me make it short, or abbreviate my remarks by saying we will have a constant battle as long as we send our children to be educated by white people.
mm. Mercy.
So
Mercy.
I just I wanted to say, Danita, I really appreciate your remarks because they help me to think carefully about a very basic question, um, which is why is it that individuals like Opal Lee can develop such a dogged determination to pursue legislation that will recognize Black history, and yet as a community, we can't seem to engender that same level of determination in solidarity with one another
Mm.
Mm,
to bring the kind of pressure to bear that will give us the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act, that will give us uh, police reform and the end of qualified immunity.
mm.
And I don't know what the answer to that question is.
I
I
have an answer. I have an
oh, okay.
answer. In writing, I wrote a show called Where the Timelines Meet, as a Black
Mhm.
History show. And what it does is that it balances two timelines, the past and the current. And one of the things I showed in that show was how when you look back 50 years and you look ahead 50 years, the same stories are happening just in different forms. But one of the things that I bring up I bring together the protest in Memphis when they were the I Am a Man
Mhm,
protest. I
mhm,
bring up the Black Power protests from California that happened years and years later. And then
mhm,
I bring up the Black Lives Matter protest. And one of
mhm,
the things that happens with the Black Lives Matter protest, which is something that I used to tell my students when I was a professor at Alabama A&M, is that this generation, as quick to start to boycott something as they are, it never lasts
Mm,
because the attention span is very short. The
mm,
fact that the Montgomery bus boycott lasted 381 days,
mm,
that is 381 days of walking. That is
mhm,
381 days of carpooling. That is
mhm,
381 days of, with some people recognizing that they still had to be at work on time. So instead of getting up at 7 to go catch your bus, you were having to get up at 4 to make sure that you walked in enough time to make it to your job where this white person was employing you. And after 381 days, the finally Montgomery bus company was like, you know what, we can't do this anymore.
mhm,
But if you look on our social media feeds, we have something that happens in the African American or affects directly the Black community, and we talk about it for a good 2 weeks, and then we're on to the next thing.
mm.
We that the reason why it was so
I see.
effective when we during 2020 is because we were all stuck in our houses and we had that concentrated effort like I talked about earlier. But
mhm,
when you're looking at things now, when we see our these giants in our current Black history dying off, and they were fighting up until their death, we watch their funerals that are being streamed to us on CNN, and then we move on. There is the reason why this Target boycott is working the way it is because I think for the first time in a very long time, there was a concentrated effort that lasted as long as it is lasting right now. So the issue is not necessarily that there aren't enough of us, honing in on something that we want change. The issue is the length of time we are willing to spend on it. You go back to, my mother was born and raised in Scottsboro, Alabama. And to hear some of the conversations that we would have, or you look at the sit-in and how long those lasted when people were going and sitting and what they were willing to go through. We're in a generation of people now that don't like discomfort. When something is uncomfortable, suddenly it's toxic. Or when something is uncomfortable, suddenly they don't want to do it anymore. Whereas we are watching, these sit-ins where they're getting drink poured on themselves. We are looking at the Montgomery bus boycott where they were, ailing while they were walking in order to get to their places. People are being sprayed with hoses in order to vote, and they still woke up the next day to get the same thing done all over again. And the issue is that we are not bringing up a generation of people, and I'm including my own generation, that Gen X generation, that are willing to be uncomfortable for an extended length of time in order to see change happen.
Mercy.
Well, I think I just wanted to make this point.
Dr. Golden and then Dr. McCoy.
And I don't mean to be contrary, but I do think that when Congress in 2020 passes bipartisan legislation in the wake of such moral outrage at the death of George Floyd, I think they're operating in the spirit of Pharaoh, who says, "Come, let us deal wisely with them." I think that Congress understood that Black people had to get something. We might not get through police reform or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, but I think there is something nefarious about throwing oppressed people something that Congress knows really isn't going to change anything. I'm not gainsaying Opal Lee or any of her efforts. I'm not gainsaying any of the efforts of the folk who work for the King holiday. But there's a difference between the good faith of the oppressed and the bad faith of the oppressor. In the end, these things become preferable, holidays become preferable to substantive reform and change. And I'm not saying it has to be an either or. We can have both and. I can appreciate Opal Lee for her dogged determination. And it can also be true that the powers that be understood that something had to be done. And if we can make Black people feel better about a holiday, we can take their eye off the ball of other things that will bring more meaningful change. It's what Derek Bell called racial symbols. I'm not denigrating any of the people who work to make these things happen, but I'm saying two things can be true. The oppressed can have good faith, and the oppressor can have bad faith at the same time. And I think as wisely as Pharaoh tries to deal with us, we must deal wisely with Pharaoh.
Come on, go ahead, Dr. McCoy. Then we gonna.
Well, I appreciate the boycott of Walmart on Tuesday. Is it Tuesday? And we talk about all the money that Walmart lost.
Target.
I'm sorry, lost on that day. But they got it back the next day if we went into their store and bought. So we sent a message, but they don't feel it, because if we're right back in those stores the very next day buying what we were going to buy the day before, they see it, but in my estimation, they haven't lost anything. And I like the point that was made about the Montgomery boycott. Those people walked for over a year. And we're talking about boycotting a store for a day. So we have to have a sustained effort if we're going to bring about the change that we desire. And also, and I'll say this, we have to understand that even in our subconscious, we are operating under the rules and regulations and laws of the oppressor. Okay? Everything that the educational system in our country, it was not designed by Black people. Okay? So that, and then here we are, we send our children to others to be educated. We're doing it voluntarily because it's a different class of people than the people that are in the ghetto. So we have a long way to go. And we've made some progress in my lifetime, and I'm about 3 days older than Sam. But I'm trying to tell you that where the distance we have to go is so far, but we have to unlearn so much.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I
And
think
we have to unlearn it and we have to unlearn it, but not become ignorant in the process.
So I want to make a quick correction because I totally agree with you, Elder McCoy. I do want to say though that the Target boycott is actually still going.
yes,
It started March 5th. It has continued. The CEO salary they had to cut the salary. They have lost stock dramatically has fallen. They have ultimately been making these Hail Mary passes to which our community has not picked up on purpose. We have even our love for Black creatives that are actually selling out of the store. We have switched to buying their things online through their encouragement. So we are actually still very deep in the midst of this boycott with Target, and it's being very effective. And so, I agree with you, like, the sustaining, knowing that sustaining power works. We have to continue on in our community to make such efforts.
And if I may just say this, I just had it delivered to me within the last few hours, the counter revolution of 1836, Gerald Horne's book, Texas Slavery and Jim Crow and the Roots of U.S. Fascism. Fascism. I just got on. It's a thick.
Yeah.
And I had never heard of this brother until a few days ago. But when I got ready to order his book, I could have gone to Amazon for one price and then to another publisher that cost more money. I didn't buy the book from Amazon. Okay. So those are these are very minute protests.
Yeah, well, let me add, Dr. McCoy, if I may, to what Danita shared. Target's market cap experienced a significant decline of 15.7 billion, dropping 22%. And as someone in the chat mentioned, I think it's Dr. Courtney, that's still going on. And I think we mentioned in our last broadcast, my wife and I, we drive further now to Costco because Sam's Club, they also had some DEI issues and dropped that from their corporate, Walmart. I had to hold my nose and go to Walmart one time, and I felt like I was committing a sin.
You were,
because I had to get some stuff. Man. I had to get some stuff, man. But we held our noses, went in there so we could eat. But let's pivot to the church, because we know, I think Dr. Golden brought up, the sometimes Congress and they throw us a bone, and it's not coming from the heart. They don't really believe, but they want to kind of push us to the side. As a church, how how can we continue to engage our communities? I know when it came to my attention what Juneteenth actually meant, and they weren't trying to just not come to church. We actually, I think there was a Boys and Girls Club that they had there, and we started doing things in the Atchison community to make a difference with our community. I had some members who were gung ho about it. Even on the Sabbath, I got some pushback from some of the brethren, but I was like, Jesus said it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So what can we do? What can our churches do? What are people of faith? How can we impact in a positive manner our communities, whether it's surrounding Juneteenth or, as we talked about earlier, pushing the envelope to have a major impact, whether it's pushing back on Target, Walmart, Sam's Club, or any other entity. What can we do? What can our churches do? What can our people do? What can our communities do?
Well,
anyone?
Mm-hmm.
I see Dr. Golden trying to get in.
No, I will defer, Pastor McCoy. You go right ahead.
We are absent in the Black community. And I think we have a golden opportunity right now to combat Black erasure by opening up our churches with after-school programs teaching Black history for these kids who, when they get home from school, they've got 2 or 3 hours before the parents get home from work. Let's activate our church buses. First of all, let the neighborhood know that we're teaching Black history in our church. Send our bus or buses to pick up the neighborhood kids and teach them for an hour or two, or whatever the case may be. Prevail upon our educators to come back into the educational arena to instruct our people, and then don't stop with the kids.
That's
Open it up in the evenings for the parents. And right now, as I understand it, I don't know of any of the other non-Adventist churches that are doing this kind of thing. But even if they are, for us to be involved is a golden opportunity to witness, to preserve our history, and to let the community at large know that we are here and we are making a positive contribution.
And Pastor McCoy, if I could just pick up on that, everything Pastor McCoy just said is especially important if you live in a state like Florida, which is essentially outlawing Black history in schools. You can't even talk about it. What did Governor Ron DeSantis say? Florida's where woke goes to die. Well, we can help our people stay awake, right? By doing the kinds of things that Elder McCoy just talked about. I will just throw out there that in addition to initiatives like teaching Black history, I have thought about this for a long time. I would say at least 20 plus years or so. I've always been of the view that at the local church level, we need to completely turn our departmental system inside out. We need to, instead of just restricting the Pathfinders to our kids, we need to recruit kids in the neighborhood, right? Instead of having Family Life just do a cruise where there's a flyer circulating and people are on the flyer smiling, why don't we have marriage support marriage support groups, divorce recovery groups for people in the community.
Mm-hmm.
How about if we turned the things that we do inside out so that instead of a sort of, I don't know, comfortable, incestuous thing
Worse.
where we just kind of feed off of each other, what would happen if the Pathfinders were open to the community and became like the Boy or the Girl Scouts? And we're so worried about, oh, well, you know, wait, I don't know how that's going to affect our kids. What would happen if your kids had a positive effect on the community?
Tim.
I mean, I just think small things as things that we can do where we can work with what we already have. I think Adventists have a certain conditioning to wait to hear from what the GC has to say. Oh, what does General Conference have to say? It's time for local churches to empower themselves.
And I'm starting to see that. I love that. I really love exactly everything that you're saying. And you're preaching to the choir over here, right? I am just now starting to see some of that effort. You know, and I think, you know, as you know, and I don't want to offend anyone who is on this watching or even on this panel, but I think when we have some of the younger preachers and pastors coming up and starting to do things a little different, you know, starting to, you know, ruffle feathers and catching heat and being with it. I think that's where we start to see change. And in my church, I don't know if my pastor, Corey Johnson of the Germantown Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Philadelphia is watching.
He's watching now. His ears are burning.
That, you know, there are things like that happening where there is a lot of outreach, and outreach not just like how we've known outreach to happen in our church, but, you know, really going out in the community, handing out food, inviting people in. You know, I lead the youth choir, and a lot of our efforts are going into the community and finding individuals to be in our choir. And then what you start to see along with that and our youth ministry, what you see is the parents coming to church and the parents participating. There are a lot of, you know, ministries that are shifting from the traditional ministries to these small groups where if you have a passion for something, you know, inside of you, you can present that to the church as, you know, I would like to lead this small group, you know, of married couples hanging out, you know, casually, not necessarily something where we go to church and we're sitting and watching a PowerPoint presentation. But I think some of these efforts are happening, and I think it's starting to move the needle. And, you know, our churches are starting to grow like we've never seen before. So some of that is happening. And I love it. And that's why, you know, it's kind of invigorating me and getting me excited all over again to be a part of this church. And, you know, some of our ministries, you know, like Pathfinders are amazing. But I do think that we do, as Tim was saying, need to step outside of what we typically know. You know, a lot of it is Adventist speak, you know, our language and all of that. We need to figure out how do we change some of the way we say and talk about things so that we can be, you know, we can relate to those who are not necessarily born or raised up in our church. If that makes sense. But yeah.
Go ahead, Danita. I see Danita, then Dr. McCoy. Go ahead.
I love what Erica's church is doing, and I am that's amazing. I think that is awesome. I want to speak to the churches that are maybe not thriving in that space as much as possible. And I want to speak to it solely because I hear this conversation a lot about, you know, we need to include our community. We need to go out into community and include. And the best way I can give this is to give a little bit of an analogy that, you know, my nickname is Storyteller. So if you bear with me for a second, my husband and I, we bought a brand new washing machine several months ago. And it's a state of the art. Like, it's one of those things where we're investing in this. We have 4 children, and it's necessary for us to have a wash machine that can take all of the everything. And as you read the manual in the washing machine, one of the things that it says is that the washing machine is ineffective when you only put one piece of clothing in the washing machine. And that it is necessary, in order for the washing machine to work, you have to put more than 1 or 2 garments in it, because the garments work together to clean each other. The reason why a lot of times we cannot open up these things that we're talking about to the community is because we're not showing up. I have been to churches as a worship manager, and I do a lot of traveling with my day job. And one of the things that I notice is that when there is a Pathfinder Day and you have 12 Pathfinders, how then can we witness to a community when we ourselves are not investing in what is, this Pathfinder Club? My kids are not going to want to join a youth choir when there are only 3 kids in the youth choir. And you have to understand that how sometimes it's our culturally, our people a lot of times will invest in what they already see working. One of my favorite things that I've heard Pastor Deblier Snell say when he does revivals in places is that the parking lot is the witness. That if people keep driving by on Sundays and they see the drill team marching and they see the drums and they say, hey, what's going on over there? Then that will empower people to actually want to come and check it out. But if they arrive at a Pathfinder, if they arrive at a youth choir, if they arrive at a marriage summit, if they arrive at, a singles ministry, family ministry kind of things, and it's, 3 people there, then at one point we're just like, well, why are you inviting me to something that isn't working? And so while I absolutely am a huge fan of outreach and ensuring that we are reaching out to our community, we also, I believe, in order to be able to reach the community, also have to be able to do some inward evangelism. I laughed when Tim talked about the incestuous evangelism that we do have, and that's absolutely true. But there also is this lack of investment in our own things. We as Adventists, we're talking about this Juneteenth and how we can practice that. The reason why we lack the music studios that could produce music that talks about such things like Juneteenth or Black history. The reason why the plays that could be on tour from Adventist churches in dealing with Black history and Juneteenth. And the reason why we don't have, these different types of things that could be traveling is because we as a church as a whole lack investing in these types of things that can go out into the community. It's not organized. And what'll happen is that we do it halfway, and then we say, God will take care of the rest. God will take care of it. Not realizing that in order for us to evangelize to these people, to teach our community, to empower them to want to come in and learn about these things, we must first know what we're talking about. We must also ensure that we are being consistent. We can't cancel because sister so-and-so decided that she couldn't come in that day and do it. We need to be able to have leaders in place in our own churches that are willing to go the extra mile to produce a kind of industry standard presentation or club in order to be able for people to walk in and say, these people are taking it seriously. And because they're taking it seriously, I'm going to show up.
I love that.
I think something that's great, Danita. I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things we also have to understand is that at the local church level and in the church generally, the work of social justice is perpetual. It doesn't just mean voting once every 4 years in a presidential election. If you are the public affairs and religious liberty leader of your church in a city like St. Louis, Pastor Josiah, you should have a representative that meets with the NAACP when they meet. You need to know who is running for district attorney in your city or in your municipality. And you need to send people from the church to candidate forums, to ask questions. It might not be a presidential election year. And yes, presidential elections are important. But see, the spirit of Juneteenth has to be a spirit of defiance, has to be the spirit of Opal Lee, a spirit of dogged determination that says things that are happening in my community, I want to know about them so that we can make a difference. So I just think, as we go forward and we ask ourselves how we're going to celebrate Juneteenth, it's more than, black folk always have a cookout, right? You can have a cookout, you can have lemonade, you spike your blood sugar, damage your colon by eating all kinds of ribs and barbecue, whatever. You can do that if you want to. But I think the true tribute is to say that Juneteenth is a day, but I'm going to indulge the spirit of determination of Opal Lee. And in my church, if you are the community services coordinator, you're going to have somebody from your team going to the local NAACP meetings. If you're the PARL director, the first two letters of PARL are public affairs. You're going to be going to the candidate forums for district attorney, for city councilman, for mayor, right? If you live in a smaller community that's governed by county commissioners, you need to know that. See, because the MAGA side of all of this is something that the other side historically has not been. Number one, they are well organized. Number two, they are well funded. And number three, they understand that real change is made at the local level. So what have these MAGA folks done? In Florida, they shut down everything. They took over school boards. You can't take over a school board if you don't know when they meet. You can't make any real change in your community, from one presidential election to the next. That's 4 years. You got 4 years to make an impact right where you are. And at some point, we have to commit ourselves in the spirit of Juneteenth to make a difference right where we are, turn our churches inside out, and be involved. And please don't go to the NAACP meeting expecting to give a Bible study. Don't do it. These folks are out here doing the work. You are there to help and to make a difference. So I just wanted to stress that.
And I love that too, Tim. I also want to, I love that you're an actor. So you'll completely understand this reference. I believe in the yes and. So yes, let's galvanize. Yes, let's go to these meetings. Right. And we can also have the barbecue downtown. Right. Right. Yes, we can go and join the NAACP meetings, and yes, and we can also show that there can be a relaxing concert or something that incorporates all of these cultures and all of these meanings, where we sometimes take it off of our turf, or if we put it on our turf, we can't be afraid to have the barbecue that also has the real meat and the chicken. And, I think sometimes what happens with our churches is that we begin to over spiritualize certain aspects of what it is that we're dealing with, right? So we're going to have this big barbecue and we want to invite the community on Juneteenth to come so that we can show them that we are a present state in this community. And then we force them to eat chocolates and vegetarian scallops. And they're just like, what is this? Right? So we want the yes and, right? Yeah. We want to do all of the things that Tim said, and we can incorporate the fun side, because one of the things I do want to say is that one of the things I think that is a problem in the Black community is that we incentivize trauma, right? The reason why there are generations of kids that don't want to talk about Juneteenth, they don't want to talk about slavery, they don't want to talk about civil rights is because we only tell them the traumatic side of that thing. Right. Even with Juneteenth, when you go back and you look at some of the stories that come out, I think there's a slave named Charlotte Brooks that tried to tell people on her plantation, hey, we're not supposed to be slaves anymore. And they didn't listen. So she was like, you know what? I'm leaving. The amount of courage that takes. But, you know, most students or actually adults don't know who that is. And so we then begin to harp on how, and let me preface this, slavery was absolutely traumatic and terrible. But when you continue to dig into that traumatic part, when we, you know, storm the box office, when there's a slave movie that comes out, but not when we have a non-traumatic Black movie that comes out, then we essentially are telling people that, yes, we want to continue to have these children learn this trauma. We need to figure out a way that as we are talking about these stories, we are celebrating them and not trying to trauma bond this generation into continuously remembering the savagery. The savagery is what we want them to understand we overcame. But the way the story continues to be told is if it's a story of overcoming, to be proud of what we have overcome, and then continue to tell that story. But again, it's that yes and, right? And that comes from improv. Yes, we want to talk about this, and we want to talk about that. And we want to bring those two things together so that it can be a proud subject and not something that we keep harping on that seems to be darker and darker as we continue to try to have that conversation.
Well,
Go ahead, Dr. McCoy. You've been trying to get in. Go ahead.
It appears to me that there needs to be an organization within our church, within our churches, whose assignment is to be aware of what's happening in their particular city, in their community. The local congressperson or city councilman. It's time for us now to make that an office in our church, in our churches, whose responsibility is community awareness. Don't make it too big, and don't look for the general conference to approve it, nor the gentleman at the general conference from our community to trumpet it. That has to be done at the local church level. I would teach, where I pastoring a church today, I'd be teaching Black history along with the Sabbath school lesson. And I'd have a pamphlet or something out, but it would be an ongoing process of educating our kids, especially if we're sending them to integrated environments for school, where they are not going to get the real story. They're not going to get it.
And I don't want to knock our doctrine. You know, I'm not sure if you were done, Pastor McCoy. I don't want to knock our system, you know, our doctrine and what we've just historically have done in our church as a practice. But I agree with you that we need to break out of, you know, our traditions a little bit to just figure out how we can relate to the community a little bit better. You know, if we don't have the pulse of the community, you know, if we don't understand, if we're not relatable, people might come into our space like, y'all a little weird in here, you know, and it's just that we're not in tune. We're not in tune with reality and what goes on outside of our walls. But I love that idea. You know, one of the things that we did, you know, a couple months ago at our church was, and not every church has the funds to do this, but, you know, it took some time, but we had a day where we were going to block off our street and have a block party on the Sabbath.
What?
On the Sabbath after church.
Ichabod.
Listen, after church, we had our service, we sang.
Hey, Erica, and think you have lived to tell about it.
Listen, we had a block party and we had music. It was a DJ. You know, they had food trucks that we had already purchased to have the food available for people, so we weren't buying and selling on the Sabbath. You know, and the community came in. They were like, "Who is this? And why is there some free food? And there's some chicken right here." You know, and I think, as you were saying, Danita, you know, it's not always about, you know, talking about the health message, which is wonderful, but making sure that we're relatable, like Dr. McCoy was saying. I do think, and I want to put a plug for the CJC conference that's happening. You know, I went last year for the first time ever, and I was literally, my mouth was like open, like, why do we not have this information at our churches all the time? Like I got so much, I got a high when I was there because all of the content was just good things. I felt like I can take back and teach. And when I came back to our, you know, folks in Philly and they're in religious liberty individuals, they were like, well, what conference are you talking about? I'm like, you don't know? And I do think that the more we talk about this in our church, you know, and do it in a way where we can digest it. Because I will be honest, I remember those religious liberty spots, and I remember like my mind like turning off, you know, when they would come up front. But I do think that there's a way that we can get this information to our congregation so that we are filled up, so that we can take it out to the people who are in our communities. So,
yeah, I was going to say, that's Danita and then Dr. McCoy. I was going to say real, well, I was going to say real.
Listen,
we got to take from the chat. So go ahead, Danita, and then we'll address the question in the chat.
So I want to talk about, you know, how to get it to the congregation. That is my bag. That is what I do. I am a playwright. I am a producer. One of the things I absolutely love is to take a subject matter that oftentimes tunes people out, that people walk out on if it was being presented in such a way, and I put it in production form, in play form, so that by the time people are done, they're just like, I want to know more. Because I think sometimes what happens is that the job that we have, even when we're talking about this Juneteenth piece, the job that we have is to encourage individuals to want to know more. We want to encourage individuals to want to get up and want to know more. How can I be a different person than what, you know, than what I was when I came in? And that's my job. So like, for instance, when you're talking about Black history information, and I mentioned this earlier, I have this show called Where the Timelines Meet. And one of the reasons why I wrote this show was because I was on social media one time. We were talking about this earlier. I think, Erica, you said something about people not realizing that Harriet Tubman was a real person. I was on social media one time and I saw this young lady say, why is everyone wishing everyone a happy milk day? And her not realizing that it was Martin Luther King Day. And I remember thinking in my head that the reason why that is a lot of times because, as Pastor McCoy mentioned earlier, when we expect a certain type of individuals to teach our kids what their history is, they're only going to get it a certain way. But the lack of research that our community does, so that the only thing, you know, we tell the same story. There was slavery, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X, if you get, you know, something related verse. And then Barack Obama, we got to add him, right, about, you know, a decade or so ago. And that's what we tell them. And yet these beautiful stories that can be intertwined into these types of things. And so that's my job as a playwright. I find the beautiful stories. So I took this concept. I said, I want to figure out how to teach Black history in a way that makes it interesting, that shows that we have come far, but also shows that we have miles to go. And that is where the timeline meets. So like when we did it, I did it for OUC, I believe last year. And one of the things I opened the show with was Ruby Bridges talking to this queen from Africa who we don't tell our kids about. that these people had these kings and queens in Africa that ruled over these nations, and how in that conversation she learns who Ruby is and Ruby learns who she is, and she begins to talk back and forth to one another, and then ultimately they say goodbye and they walk away. So by the time we had the talk back, because I do that with Colin Kaepernick and the boycott at the Olympics, and how the story shares that a white person was actually very pivotal in the two conversations that were had at those two situations that were separated by decades. And we talk about how the Caged Bird, which is a poem that and it's leaving me because my brain is
Maya
tired.
Angelou?
No, Maya Angelou wrote I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Oh, I see.
But it was previously another individual, a Black poet, that wrote it, and so they have a conversation. By the time we got done with that show and we had a talk back with the church congregation, and there were people that were saying, we need you to write down these names because either we've never heard them or we want to know more about them. And it was Paul Lawrence Dunbar. Paul Lawrence Dunbar. But those two things are never, compared, because people are unwilling to dive that deep. So one of the ways our churches can do that, empower the writers in your churches, empower the playwrights in your churches, and make it so that it's not just about Adventist history. It's just not about Adventist Black history, but it is about the beautiful history that this country has seen, where we talk about the yes and, as we talked about with Tim earlier. And then from there, take that play around, take it to your camp meetings, take it to your, betas, take it to your regional conference meetings, so that we continue to tell these stories. Empower these creatives that you have at your churches that are begging to be able to talk about this conversation. Empower them to tell the stories, so that we can find other ways to evangelize and to preach to our people, aside from sermons and from spotlights that we have throughout our Sabbath day.
Now, Danita has me ready to jump through this screen, because I have a word for the Adventist theological orthodoxy, for the purists among us who are so concerned that fiction would have a place in the house of God. May I remind you that we serve a God who is a creator, and that we are made in his image, which means that we have a capacity to be creative. Consider Genesis 1, verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And then verse 3 says, and God said, let there be light. This scripture tells us that nothing is created until the Spirit moves. And when the Spirit of God moves, the word in the Hebrew is hover. As it hovered over the water, as it was in the midst of chaos and darkness and an empty void and feeling useless and troubled, that's when we get creative. Art is the last step before insanity. That we process our trauma through creativity. That's why we can have that problem that Danita was talking about. When we get to the end of our rope, this is why so many children, especially Black children, there was an article in a newspaper not too long ago. Black children who have experienced trauma go through art therapy. Why? Because when the world you live in is messed up, you have the opportunity to create another one, right? And you sense that you feel empowered over your reality in a way that you otherwise would not be. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, no artist tolerates reality. Why not? Because a true artist goes and creates a new one. That's what happened during the pandemic. Science told us we had to stay away from each other, and art kept us sane. What did we do? We stayed home. We watched Netflix. We watched movies. We entered into fictive worlds. And I'm going to close with this. Jesus taught in parables. Jesus taught in parables. He understood, so that in Luke 10, the parable of the Good Samaritan, when the lawyer came to Jesus and asked him, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus was looking into the same chaos and terror that he looked into in Genesis 1, verse 2. And he didn't even answer the man's question. The man said, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus' answer was, a man was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho. Because the scripture tells us in a parenthetical that the lawyer was only asking the question to justify himself.
That's right.
See, he wanted Jesus to tell him, your neighbor is somebody who lives no more than 50 paces from your front door, so that he could limit his moral obligation. But by the time Jesus got finished doing what? Telling a story. That's what's so powerful about what Danita just said. When Jesus got finished telling the story, the lawyer walked away realizing that there is no limit to my moral obligation. That my moral obligation extends not only to my house or to my block or to my community, but it extends to anyone in need. And Jesus did that through a parable. So let's follow his example and stop demonizing creativity and start embracing it. Art is the last step before insanity.
Yeah.
Dr. McCoy, go ahead.
When you start talking about the clergy, then my senses are raised. The fact is that the church owns the clergy.
Ooh. Wow.
The church, yes, it manipulates the clergy. Okay, and it does, and I'm not absolutely sure that we are absolutely aware of that. And I should have said before I made that last statement is you can't beat me being a Seventh-day Adventist. I'm Adventist to the bone. Okay, but it does not blind me to some of our shortcomings. The church manipulates us with upward mobility. We are always on our way somewhere else. We can't be satisfied with the church we have because we are looking for our next step up. I don't hear any other Black clergy talking about promotion. First day clergy, I mean, they'll stay in the church for generations as the pastor. But we're always looking for the next largest church, to the conference office department, to administration, to the union, to the division, to the general conference, and then we retire. We're always leaving from where we are. Okay? And the church manipulates us with that. Okay? And when the general conference brethren come around, our speech changes. We have here today from the general conference. We do. And we have these men, God bless them for being there, because without them we'd have nothing. But when they get to these positions, and I'm talking about the church manipulating us, they have advanced. We have not advanced unless they have taken us with them. You follow?
Yeah,
so we can make all the steps, and we get to retirement and we look around and we have done well. but have we done well for our people? Let me say this and then I'll quit. The capital city of Black Seventh-day Adventism in the United States is resident in 2 churches, the Oakwood University Church and the First Church of Huntsville, Alabama. If you don't believe me, you look at the numbers of people who go to church at their church and come home and watch those telecasts. Now, with that comes a responsibility. They can, these things that we're talking about, incorporated into however those 2 churches plan it, they can feed this to every congregation in this country. And I'm telling you, thousands of people watch those services every Sabbath. I can't wait to get home from church to see what y'all said, Danita. Okay. And I'm serious.
Sure.
So there's an opportunity there. And in a sense, we have to stop looking organizationally. I remember a conference president in my early years in the ministry say, follow the policy, brethren, and you stay out of trouble. Our responsibility is to make trouble.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay? So we follow the policy, we stay out of trouble, and our people do not advance. We have people that have walked out of our churches to the church across town. We know where they are. We don't ever go after them. We have Black clergy. And this is when I need, anyway, I'm going to say it since it came up. We have Black clergy leaving our conferences, going to other conferences to pastor Black churches. They're going, when they get over there, they have what they had. So I'm saying, why did you make the move? And I've asked, they said, well, I have a staff. One of my daughters said to me one time, Daddy, if we have a pastor that baptizes 25 people a year and we get an assistant pastor, then he ought to get 25. So between the 2 of them, we should have 50 baptisms a year. So we add staff, but we, in essence, don't grow.
I'm saying something.
All right, we got this question in the chat that we'll let you guys tackle. I don't think Erica may know this person, but we'll see. And it says, I understand about the boycott, but what about this administration fight against DEI and woke that we need to fight back? And I think you guys have done an excellent job talking about the role of the Black church historically and presently, and what needs to be fixed to be more relevant in our community. But these policy issues also have a form, in terms of our response, of evangelism. So many times we think of evangelism as a campaign that happens every 6 months, but fail to realize that when the church speaks on a week-to-week basis or gets involved in events or things in the community, that is actually a form of evangelism.
That's right.
And for whatever reason, we want to put a label on called politics and stop dealing with issues that are impacting our communities. Yet this was not the case 60 years ago during the civil rights movement. So when we see questions like this, when we talk about the relevancy of the Black church as a whole, but also in the context of Adventism, why are we silent now on these policy issues when we were very vocal 60 years ago, to the point where the Black church was actually doing policy initiatives through Dr. King to make these changes?
Well, I think I think in addition to the points Danita raised early on about this generation not being able to focus attention for a sustained period of time, there has been a troublesome proliferation of identities within the Black community that keeps the Black community divided against itself. For example, the LGBTQ community includes a lot of Black people. It always has. James Baldwin was gay. Bayard Rustin, Dr. King's most trusted advisor, he was gay. Barbara Jordan, the great African American woman congresswoman, she was a lesbian. But somehow, and the Black Lives Matter movement is especially guilty of this, somehow the Black Lives Matter movement became a movement about excluding Black men from the leadership, right? Now, how are you supposed to be heading an organization? And I'm not talking about the slogan. I'm not talking about the concept. I'm talking about the organization and its leadership, which literally made money and raised money off of the death of Black people who were being killed, and on one hand purported to stand up for the 96% of Black men. Yes, that number is correct. According to the Washington Post, the amount of Black people killed, out of the Black people killed during police violence from 2015 to 2019, 96% of them were Black men. 96%. Now, that doesn't discount Breonna Taylor, Tatiana Jefferson, Rekia Boyd. We all know Black women, but somehow we have our social movements have been ruptured by a certain kind of ideology that is radical and left, and that has demonized heterosexuality in the Black community, in particular, heterosexual Black men. The church has a problem with this because we have to, on one hand, negotiate these gender identities, right? There are gay folk in the Black community and lesbians and trans folk, and all of that's true. But how do we balance the policy interests, right? How do we balance the competing interests of, I mean, like I am not toxic because I am a man. And just because I am a Black man who is heterosexual, it does not mean that I necessarily will treat a Black woman the way a white man would treat a white woman or a Black woman or any other kind of woman, right? But somehow, I mean, if you consider the issue of women's ordination, it is overwhelmingly the case that among African American male pastors, they support women's ordination. It gets troublesome when we have other Black identities in the clergy, like Caribbeans and some Africans, who have been sort of proxied into white supremacy, and then they get colonized, right, through a sanitized evangelism that tells them that Black people in the United States are bad. And so they come to the United States, and you're in a church with an African brother or sister or a Caribbean brother or sister, and you notice the tension with the music. They like hymns, we like to swing and clap our hands and all. And so there are these Eurocentric traces of white supremacy that really infringe upon something that I think, and we don't talk about this enough, there's a uniquely African American identity.
Say it, doctor.
Period. It's not like I can't, I mean, I know we got 23andMe and all the genetic things, but I can't go to Africa. I can't go to an African. If you're from Jamaica, you can go maybe to your village or your parents' village. You can speak patois. You know where I can go? I can go to Philly.
That's right.
That's where I
I'm
can
coming
go.
with you.
I go to Philly, or you can go to Detroit, or you could go to Cleveland, right? And you might try to figure out your ancestry through some commercial genetic service, but you can't go to those villages and be welcome. So my point is that Juneteenth is something uniquely African American, right? And it's not just something that whites need to appreciate. It's something that blacks from Africa need to appreciate.
Yes.
It's something that blacks from the Caribbean need to appreciate. If you're from Haiti, or if you're black and you're Dominican, you need to know these things. So we have this argument. I see. One of the things in Dr. King's Day, black men and women worked together.
Yes.
They worked together. And there was stable family life, and they did things together. And there were no less gay folk back then, right? They may not have been open with it, right? But Brian Rustin was there. James Baldwin was around, right? So we have to figure out as a community how to get along without demonizing each other. And I think once we can negotiate the coexistence of ourselves with each other, because there's nothing wrong with me, because I have prayed and God has told me that there's nothing wrong with being a heterosexual black man, despite what the culture tells me. So we got to figure out how to get along with each other and how to appreciate uniquely, very uniquely, what it means to be African American. Because that, I think, is part of the spirit of Juneteenth. I'm sorry for going on.
Yeah, that's
May I say this?
Sure.
A few years back, when I was in the retirement office in Huntsville, I had a newsletter. And I told this to a congregation in Washington, D.C. a couple months ago. And I had an article entitled Great Big Elephant in the Room. And I was dealing with the Black American versus Black people from the diaspora. And I didn't use the term then. And I had that thing ready to go. I was dealing straight up because I thought we will never solve this problem if we never talk about it. We act like it isn't there, And so I had this thing all written, and I had my administrative assistant to put it out, and the newsletter was ready to go. And I had it on my desk in my office at home. And my wife saw it. And she said to me, "If you print this, I will divorce you." And I said, and she said, "I am not playing." And that sister was not playing. Okay. And what she was saying to me is, and she told me in no uncertain terms, she said, "You've done controversial things all of your ministry. You are unaware of the blowback that comes to me and our daughters." And she said, "I can't do it anymore." And she said, "If you publish this, I'm out."
Mercy.
You never heard of that article, have you? I wasn't about to let that sister go. But
hey, Doc.
Yeah.
Send it to me. Send it to me. I got you covered. And the reason I say I got you covered is that I've been on both sides. People who don't know that I'm from the Caribbean, I've heard things, and then some people who don't know that I'm an Eagles fan, and because my accent is kind of gone, they figure I'm an American, and so I think Tim hit it on the head, man. Unless we recognize what Jesus prayed for in John 17, they will know. He prayed for us to be one. I'm talking about as an African community, not just as Christians. When we are one, there's nothing that can stop us. He said that the world may believe that that you have sent me. Speaking of the Father, and I think that I've learned a lot, but I've also had to 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 bring some of my Caribbean people along with me so that they can see. Listen, Juneteenth, MLK, all of the freedoms, the civil rights, the voter, all of the rights that we have as immigrants. I'm a first generation immigrant. My kids say that they're American. They don't have nothing to do with me. I mean, they know island food, but like, damn, we're American. You know, they're all four of them born here. But there is still something to be said for an article like that, where if we're not playing on the same team, if we're not in the same fight, then the witness is diluted. We can't be good witnesses, and you know, you can talk about hymns, you can talk about worship style, you can talk about all the colonization that you want. It's a mindset. If you recognize that we are one, these are my brothers and sisters, and decolonize. I saw Dr. Friedman in there, Sydney. If we decolonize our minds, we would recognize that we are actually stronger together than we are separately, and we can make that difference in the because it's all about making that difference in the community based on what we've been talking about.
We'll never close the gap if we don't have an honest conversation.
We got to talk about it. I agree.
I mean, you have to do it.
You know, I ain't scared to talk about anything. So
no, we know you're not. But the issue is your ministerial departments also have to educate.
Yes.
And we don't want to talk about that. You have to educate. What does it mean to pastor in a context? Yes. And we got to take professional development seriously. Ministerial department can't be reactive to when it becomes to disciplinary action. It needs to be proactive in terms of matching these pastors with churches to ensure success for both groups.
That's right.
I mean, I've never seen a conference president who doesn't want a pastor to be successful. And I've never been to a church that doesn't want their pastor to be successful. But there's got to be intentionality as it relates to an appropriate fit. And when saying that, my brother Josiah from Virgin Islands is blackety black, Elder McCoy, and some of the African Americans that are here.
You know
it. And that's just, so we can't make paint everyone with the same brush. You know, we have to give people an opportunity to stand for themselves. But we also learned last year, and then Danita, you could take over, that Father Flager and the South Side of Chicago at St. Sabina's Church has a 93% African American church, and he's relevant every week.
Yep.
So it's not limited to a color or a country.
It's a mindset. Good, Danita.
I do want to say, and I don't know how much longer I can stay with y'all. I have a service I have to run in the morning.
I got to preach in the morning. What are you talking about?
Wrap it up. But one of the things I do want to mention, though, in situations like this, especially when I hear us talk about unity, I want to talk, we talk about coming together, we all having to be together. I still want us to remember that us working together and being together doesn't necessarily mean we have to agree. There are going to be differences. One of my favorite things when I'm doing workshops on with single women that are seeking to find better relationships, and one of the things I tell them is that the color red has 57 shades. So it's all the color red, but it has different, some of the shades can be slightly different than the other one, but there are 57 different shades. When we bring us together, when we bring the community together, whether it is people from the Caribbean, whether it's people that were born and raised in the United States, whether it's people that are from the continent of Africa, whether it's people that are from Brazil, and think that we all come together and we all look even how we look. We also have to acknowledge the fact that even though we are all working for the same thing, it's okay for us to be different shades of that same thing. So instead of trying to agree that our music has to sound the same, or instead of having to agree that our methods have to be the same, we still need to say the destination is the same.
That's right.
How we are getting there can be different. But if I, if we're talking a relay race, right? If all of us are running a relay race, if my goal is to get the baton into your hand, the method in which I do that is just meaning that I need to get it there faster than, the other person. When we begin to insist that this person has to run like this person, or this person has to play like this person plays, we then are assigning them something that is not innate to what they actually are willing to be able to do. If I assign you a project and that is not where your strength is, or that is not where, you can be successful, then I am actually doing you a disservice by insisting that you do it this way. So as we begin to bring these people together, as we begin to bring us together, we also need to help us understand that my thing may not look like Erica's thing. And my thing may not look like Tim's thing. And Tim's thing may not look like Pastor McCoy's thing. And that's okay, because the destination is the same. And because we are working for the same destination, that is how we begin to make those changes.
That's good.
That's very well, ladies and gentlemen, boys.
We got to wrap.
We want to thank our distinguished panelists for coming with us. The thing is, the panelists drove the discussion, and that's why we are still here an hour and 40-some minutes later, because they
It's
were
not our
rich.
fault.
We just facilitated.
We didn't do it.
But the panelists make the show. So we want to thank once again Erica Keith, the creator and founder of Black Forward. Want to thank her again. We want to thank Danita Lachelle Wilson, production by Danita Jones, for once again coming on the broadcast. We want to thank the philosopher and lawyer and actor himself, Dr. Timothy J. Golden, for being with us tonight. And last but not least, we always have a senior statesman with us, affectionately known as Uncle Joe, but none other than Pastor Joseph McCoy, the retired director of the Regional Retirement System and the former president of the South Central Conference. We're always grateful when he spends time with his sons and daughters to talk to us about ministry, impact, and tell the unadulterated truth. If you don't want to hear from Elder McCoy, don't ask him. He will tell you the truth. And that's why he's still beloved today in 2025. As we kick off our, as we conclude this broadcast, we want to inform you of a couple of things. On July 11th, the flyer will come out next week. We will be having, start promoting our celebration of the gospel of Jesus Christ, a community celebration that will take place in St. Louis on Friday, July 11th at 7 p.m. Central Time, where the speaker will be Dr. Carlton P. Bird, president of the Southwest Regional Conference, and we'll have the Community Gospel Choir. This is a multi-ethnic choir of St. Louis that will be a part of that, as well as the Slam Praise Team, where the musician himself will be none other than Pastor Christian Joseph.
Wait, hold on.
Who will be leading out with the keys and the talented thing himself. But we want you to come
I'm going to outsource.
Go ahead. But we want to raise funds to help the tornado victims in St. Louis. That will be where the proceeds are going. In addition, we'll have Bettina Krause from Liberty Magazine, Pastor Gary Thurber, the president of the Mid-American Union Conference, and Orland Johnson, who is the director of public affairs and religious liberty for the North American Division. So if you're in St. Louis, we want to do something for the community and make sure the funds that we raise help the tornado victims in St. Louis. All roads will lead to St. Louis at the Central Baptist Church. Please stay tuned, and look for our newsletter. And we want you to know our newsletter comes out on Fridays. You can catch it on our webpage and our Facebook page. And it's done by none other than Erica Keith, the creator and founder of Black Forward. So we're very, very happy to have someone with her rich expertise participating with us as a partner. Want to remind you that from September 25th to the 28th, the Conscience and Justice Council will be dealing with systems of oppression as a part of our annual convention taking place in Huntsville, Alabama at the Embassy Suites from September 25th to the 28th. You can go to our website and get to the registration at www.cjcouncil.org, www.cjcouncil.org, and you can register for the Conscious and Justice Conference annual convention. Once again, we want to thank our guests. And Elder McCoy, if you can pray us out, we'll be greatly, greatly appreciative.
Loving Father, we are thankful for this gathering this evening. We trust that everything that we have done has been pleasing to you. Now bless us during the hours of this Sabbath day to all be blessed, and fix it so that all of us will be ready to see you when you come to get us. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
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 Amen.